Have you ever felt like something profound is changing inside you, as if the reality we've always known is no longer enough to explain what's happening in the world? What if I told you that this moment may have been predicted thousands of years ago? Ancient teachings attributed to Thoth, one of the most mysterious figures of ancient knowledge, spoke about a specific period in human history, a time when millions of people would begin awakening at the same time, questioning the system, reality, and even the true nature of consciousness. But here's the unsettling part: this awakening was never meant to be comfortable. Thoth warned that this phase would bring confusion, the collapse of old beliefs, and a deep inner conflict for those who begin to see beyond ordinary reality. So the real question is, are we living through that exact moment right now? In this video, you'll discover Thoth's warning about this phase of human awakening, and why so many people feel that something extraordinary is happening at this very moment. But before we begin, comment the word awakening below if you also feel that your consciousness has changed in recent years. And let's explore this together. Over the past few years, millions of people around the world have reported exactly this experience. A sense of awakening. A deep questioning of reality, of who we are, and why we are here. Interestingly, this kind of collective transformation is not just a theme of modern spirituality. Ancient texts, Hermetic traditions, and teachings attributed to a very enigmatic figure of antiquity, known as Thoth, already described that humanity would go through cycles of consciousness. According to these traditions, there would be a specific moment in human history when dormant knowledge would begin to re-emerge. A period when many people would feel an inner call to understand the nature of reality, the mind, and consciousness itself. It's important to say something with full transparency from the beginning. From a historical perspective, the texts known as the Emerald Tablets of Thoth are surrounded by mystery. There is no solid archaeological evidence confirming their literal origin in ancient Egypt, as many popular narratives suggest. Most historians consider these writings part of Hermetic traditions that were compiled much later, especially between the Middle Ages and the modern period. But here is the fascinating point: regardless of their exact origin, these teachings present extremely profound symbolic ideas about consciousness, mind, energy, and human evolution. And when we analyze these ideas in the light of what modern science has been discovering, especially in neuroscience, psychology, and even in some popular interpretations of quantum physics, something interesting begins to appear. Perhaps these texts were not only describing external events. Perhaps they were describing internal processes of human consciousness. Processes that now seem to be unfolding on a large scale. If you found this message today, maybe it's not by accident. Maybe you have also felt that something has shifted in the way you perceive the world. Maybe certain questions have begun to arise within you, questions that simply didn't exist before. And if this resonates with you, leave a comment with the phrase, "My consciousness is expanding." It may seem simple, but when you consciously declare something, you begin to align your attention, and attention is one of the most powerful forces within the human mind. And if you feel that conversations like this are important for your personal growth, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It may seem like a small digital action, but in practice it helps this type of content reach more people who are going through the same awakening process. And the more people awaken to their own consciousness, the stronger the collective field of awareness on this planet becomes. Now, to understand why so many spiritual seekers believe we may be living through the phase described in these ancient teachings, we first need to understand who, or what, this figure called Thoth actually represented. Because in the Hermetic tradition, Thoth was not just a historical character. He was considered an archetype of universal knowledge. And to understand what that means, we need to go back thousands of years in time. To understand why so many spiritual seekers connect the current moment of humanity with the teachings attributed to Thoth, we first need to understand who this figure actually was, or perhaps more accurately, what it represents. In ancient Egyptian mythology, Thoth was known as the god of wisdom, writing, time, and knowledge. He was often depicted with the head of an ibis or a baboon and was considered the scribe of the gods, the one who recorded the laws of the universe and maintained the balance of cosmic order. From a historical perspective, Egyptologists recognize Thoth as a symbolic deity within the Egyptian religious system. However, over the centuries, this figure underwent a fascinating cultural transformation. During the Hellenistic period, when Greek culture encountered Egyptian civilization in Alexandria, many thinkers began associating Thoth with the Greek god Hermes. From this symbolic fusion emerged a figure known as Hermes Trismegistus, which literally means Hermes, the thrice great. From this tradition came the texts known as the Corpus Hermeticum, a collection of philosophical and spiritual writings that explore themes such as mind, consciousness, reality, and the nature of the universe. These texts are not considered to have been literally written by a being named Hermes or Thoth. Most historians believe they were produced between the 1st and 3rd centuries of the Common Era by thinkers influenced by Greek philosophy, Egyptian spirituality, and mystical traditions of the ancient world. Even so, the ideas within these writings are remarkably profound. They describe the universe as an interconnected system in which mind, matter, and energy are part of a single living reality. One of the central ideas of the Hermetic tradition can be summarized in a famous principle. As above, so below; as below, so above. This phrase is not merely mystical poetry. It expresses the idea that patterns of the universe repeat across different scales, from the cosmos to the human mind. Interestingly, this way of thinking finds echoes in modern science. Contemporary physics describes a universe structured by patterns, fields, and energetic interactions. Neuroscience, on the other hand, reveals that our perception of reality is not simply an objective photograph of the world, but an active construction created by the brain. In other words, what we perceive as reality is deeply influenced by the way our mind processes information. And here we encounter a fascinating convergence between science and spirituality. If our perception of reality is shaped by the mind, then expanding consciousness can literally transform the way we experience the world. In modern psychology, this process is known as cognitive restructuring, when a person begins to perceive life through new mental frameworks. In contemporary spirituality, many people describe this same process as awakening consciousness. This awakening does not mean someone suddenly sees supernatural phenomena or leaves ordinary reality behind. In most cases, it begins in a much simpler way. A person starts questioning automatic patterns of thought. They begin to notice cultural conditioning that once seemed invisible. They start observing their own mind. And this simple act of observation already produces a profound transformation in the brain. Neuroscience studies show that practices of conscious attention, such as meditation and self-reflection, can change neural connections associated with perception, emotional regulation, and mental clarity. In other words, the idea of expanding consciousness is not only a spiritual concept. It also has observable foundations in how the human brain works. Perhaps that is why throughout history so many spiritual traditions have spoken about awakening, not as a sudden mystical event, but as a gradual expansion of perception. And if this process begins within each individual, there is an inevitable question. What happens when millions of people begin going through this same process at the same time? This is exactly where many modern interpretations of the teachings attributed to Thoth become especially interesting. Some of these texts suggest that humanity would move through periods of deeper unconsciousness, followed by cycles of rediscovery of knowledge. cycles in which the human mind would once again begin questioning old structures and searching for a deeper understanding of reality. If we interpret this symbolically, perhaps we are not talking about a literal prophecy. Perhaps we are talking about something far more human. Natural cycles of collective consciousness evolution. And if we observe the modern world carefully, some signs of this process are already beginning to appear. But before we explore these signs, there is an important aspect that many people overlook when they begin walking the path of awakening. Because expanding consciousness can be liberating, but it can also be profoundly challenging. When we observe the modern world carefully, something curious begins to appear. More and more people report a growing sense of disconnection from old ways of living. Patterns that once seemed completely normal, rigid beliefs, automatic routines, unquestioned social structures, start to trigger a quiet internal questioning. It is not necessarily an external rebellion. It is more like a silent awakening, a gradual realization that reality might be far deeper than what we were taught to believe. Interestingly, this phenomenon has also been observed in contemporary psychology. Many researchers study what are called personal paradigm shifts, moments when individuals completely reorganize the way they interpret life. These shifts can be triggered by crises, periods of deep introspection, or simply by an accumulation of experiences that lead the mind to search for greater meaning. And here is where neuroscience adds a fascinating perspective. The human brain is not a fixed structure. It possesses a property known as neuroplasticity, the ability to reorganize neural connections throughout life. This means that the way we perceive the world can literally change. When a person begins reflecting on themselves, questioning old beliefs, and developing conscious awareness, new neural networks start forming. Gradually, the brain begins operating in a more integrated way, connecting emotion, reasoning, and perception more harmoniously. This process can create a very unusual sensation. Many people describe it as if they were waking up from an automatic state, as if, for the first time, they are truly observing their own thoughts. This moment can be liberating, but also confusing. Because when old certainties begin dissolving, the mind naturally searches for new frameworks to understand reality. This is often when people begin exploring spirituality, philosophy, consciousness studies, and ancient wisdom traditions, not as an escape from reality, but as an attempt to understand it more deeply. Interestingly, this kind of search appears symbolically in the Hermetic texts attributed to Thoth. They describe the human journey as a path of remembrance, as if essential knowledge has always existed within consciousness itself, waiting to be rediscovered. From a scientific perspective, we might interpret this idea in an interesting way. The human mind has an extraordinary capacity for self-reflection. We are one of the few species capable of observing our own thoughts. And when that observation becomes conscious, something profound happens. We begin to realize that we are not merely the thoughts passing through the mind. There is a space of awareness behind them. That space is what many spiritual traditions call presence. And the more a person connects with this state of presence, the more clarity they develop about their choices, emotions, and direction in life. Perhaps that is why so many people today report the feeling that they are going through some kind of internal upgrade, as if older versions of themselves are gradually being replaced by a broader understanding of reality. If you have ever felt something like this at any point in your life, try writing the following sentence in the comments. I choose to awaken to a broader consciousness. It may seem like a simple symbolic act, but when you write or declare an intention clearly, you activate neural networks related to direction and purpose. And this leads us to an extremely important point about conscious affirmations. The affirmations you leave here, in the comments or in your personal notebook, are more than words. They are codes of vibration. When you write, read, and consciously repeat them, You create an energetic circuit that reprograms the mind and anchors this new timeline within your field. That is why when I invite you to comment, it is not only to engage with the video, it is to feed the collective flow of consciousness. It is an anchoring exercise. Daily repetition transforms vibration into identity. So if you wish to seal this understanding right now, right here or for yourself, I consciously choose the frequency that creates my world. Repeat this phrase over the next few days, either aloud or silently. Let it become the soundtrack of your vibrational field. Because every time you pronounce it, the universe reorganizes its particles around this new coherence. And gradually, everything that does not resonate with it begins to dissolve, naturally, without effort. Practices like this may seem simple, but studies in cognitive psychology show that repeated conscious affirmations can reshape deeply rooted mental patterns. In other words, what many traditions call vibrational change can also be understood scientifically as the reprogramming of neural and emotional patterns. And when many people begin going through this process at the same time, something even more interesting starts to happen. Not only individuals change, the collective field of human consciousness begins to shift as well. When many people begin going through similar interchanges at the same time, something very interesting happens. We are no longer speaking only about individual transformations. Gradually, these changes begin to reflect in the way entire societies think, organize themselves, and envision the future. Ideas that once seemed marginal start appearing in everyday conversations. Topics such as mental health, life purpose, emotional balance, meditation, consciousness, and human interconnectedness are now part of public discussions across many parts of the world. This movement does not happen by accident. In social psychology, there is a concept known as a shared cultural field. It describes how collective beliefs and perceptions can gradually shift as more people begin to see reality from new perspectives. When a sufficient number of individuals begin questioning old patterns, new ways of thinking become possible. This process has happened several times throughout history. There were moments when humanity experienced true revolutions of consciousness, such as the emergence of philosophy in ancient Greece, the Renaissance in Europe, or the great scientific advancements of the last centuries. Each of these phases marked an expansion in the way human beings understood the universe and themselves. Perhaps what we are witnessing today is another one of these cycles. But this time there is an important difference. Never before in human history have so many people been connected simultaneously. The internet, global information networks, and the speed at which ideas travel have created an environment where new perspectives can spread across the world within days. This means that inner awakening processes that once took generations to expand can now spread much faster. At the same time, this transformation also brings challenges. When old structures of thought begin to shift, resistance naturally appears. Long-established systems, cultural, social, and psychological, do not always change easily. For that reason, true awakening is not simply a moment of spiritual enthusiasm. It also requires emotional maturity, discernment, and responsibility. Awakening does not mean believing everything that sounds mystical or extraordinary. It means developing clarity. It means learning to observe information critically while keeping the heart open to new possibilities. It is a rare balance between lucidity and sensitivity. Perhaps that balance is exactly what many ancient teachings attempted to convey. When we look symbolically at the Hermetic traditions attributed to Thoth, we notice that they often speak about knowing oneself as the path to understanding the universe. Today we know that this idea also has a deep psychological foundation. The more a person understands themselves, their emotions, mental patterns, and values, the more conscious they become about the choices they make. And the more conscious our choices become, the more aligned our lives begin to feel with what truly matters. This type of transformation does not depend on extraordinary external events. It begins within the mind. It begins in the way we choose to interpret reality. And when this shift happens in thousands or even millions of people, it naturally begins influencing the world around them. Perhaps that is why many spiritual traditions say that the true revolution of humanity is a revolution of consciousness. Not a violent revolution, but a quiet transformation in the way we perceive life. Within this process, certain affirmations can serve as internal anchors of alignment and clarity. My consciousness creates clarity, purpose, and balance. When a person consciously repeats ideas like this, they reinforce new mental and emotional patterns within themselves. If this message resonated with you, share it. Help expand this field of consciousness, because every person who awakens illuminates hundreds of others. And remember, the highest timeline is not a place in the future. It is a state of being available here and now. May you walk in peace, clarity, and love. Until the next awakening.